Ahoy, hoy, fun scrumpers. This is the e-petition regarding consumer law and video games. Essentially, stop killing games. Let's see what they have to say, shall we?
Of video games to people across the country. And this is not just a domestic issue either. Similar campaigns are ongoing in the EU, the United States, Canada and Australia. This is a global conversation and the United Kingdom must not be left behind. I come to this debate not only as a Member of Parliament but as a lifelong gamer. From my childhood through to university, games have been a constant, sometimes a way to switch off, sometimes a means to connect with others and sometimes a way to challenge myself. Even today, when I get the odd quiet evening, you'll still catch me planning new trade networks on Victoria 2, optimising traffic flow in cities' skylines, or returning to the timeless brilliance of the Oddworld series. For many of us, gaming is personal. It's not just simply entertainment, it's a memory, identity and community. And that is why today's debate matters. The video game industry itself contributes £7.6 billion to the UK economy and supports over 75,000 jobs. We are home to world-leading studios, cutting-edge research and some of the most talented creative minds anywhere on Earth. We should value this industry not only for its economic output, but as a cultural powerhouse that shapes stories, art, music and technology.
On that point,
Of course.
I'm grateful to my Honourable friend for giving way. I wonder if he's aware of Cambridge-based Ninja Theory's work with neuroscientist Professor Paul Fletcher on the game Hellblade. It gives a really powerful insight into psychosis and shows how game developers can work effectively with gamers for real social purpose.
I thank my honourable friend for Cambridge. This is the thing about gaming. It's not just about the creative arts, it's also about science and technology. Cambridge bats above its average in terms of not just within the UK, but across the global stage. And I know I'm very proud to be an East Anglian MP, with you next door to me, actually providing this for the future. But the nature of games has changed. Many modern titles are live services, constantly updated, server-dependent, and reliable on ongoing operational costs. That is not inherently a bad thing. Live services have created vibrant global communities, but it has also changed what it means to own a game. Gamers still feel the deep sense of personal possession because they invest more than money. They invest time, effort, imagination and friendship. When a game shuts down without clear notice, that investment is lost. A shared world disappears. The Video Game History Foundation estimates that 87% of games released before 2010 are now critically endangered. Of course.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I had received an email from a constituent of mine who explained how his experiences of his beloved video games has been rendered unplayable when a company decides to end server support. We do not accept our mobile phones being switched off whenever a company produces a new model and wants us to buy the new model. So why should we allow thousands of pounds worth of games being made unplayable just because new games have been introduced? So does my honourable friend agree that when we buy a video game, we own to play it whenever we want to, and we need regulation to ensure this, and it's not an unreasonable ask of multi-million-pound companies who produce these games?
I think the honourable friend raises a really important point here. What is it to own a video game? What is it to keep the background services running? And is it an interactive process going forward with multiple users, or is it just a single access game? As I say, gamers still feel a deep sense of personal possession because they invest more than money. They invest time, effort, imagination and friendship. When a game shuts down without clear notice, that investment is lost, a shared world disappears. And as I say, that is not just a consumer issue, it is a cultural one. This debate is not just about keeping games playable, it's about preserving our cultural heritage. The National Video Game Museum in Sheffield is already doing fantastic work to document, curate and celebrate this history. But we need to support institutions like this further. I would urge the government to explore funding, partnerships and sector support to ensure we maintain a library full of significant games. Not necessarily full playable versions, but assets, scripts, soundtracks and design documents. We would never dream of pulping every copy of Shakespeare, and we should not think any differently about video games. And we've seen what is possible when communities are empowered. When Doom was released decades ago, it sparked an entire ecosystem of mods, creativity and eventual genre-defining innovation. We also see it with ROM hacking communities, especially around older titles such as Super Mario World. Now, I'll be the first to admit I cannot play Super Mario World Kaizo for toffee, Those levels are punishing, but I do enjoy watching streamers like Barbarous King, both in creating, and this is the first time Hansard's going to have to write this down, the Grand Poo World trilogy, and playing it live. And that highlights yet another modern element of gaming culture, streaming. Platforms like Twitch have turned gameplay into performance art, commentary and community. People gather to cheer, learn, laugh and share. This too is culture, and it deserves to be safeguarded. Now, I want to be absolutely clear that this debate is not anti-industry. Running online games cost real money. Servers are hardware, maintenance contracts, security, teams of engineers, these all cost money. And requiring developers to define end-of-life strategies upfront could stifle innovation and create unintended risks. But gamers deserve clarity. If a game is likely to go offline, they should be told. Where possible...
In my constituency of Stratford-on-Avon, as in many other areas, residents are increasingly finding that video games they thought they owned simply stop working when online support ends, or are indeed the ownership is limited by the terms and conditions in the license. And this is deeply frustrating for consumers who have paid in good faith. So does the honourable member agree that government should ensure existing consumer protections keep pace with these changes so that people are not left out of pocket when digital services they rely on are switched off, often without warning?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention. It is really important, I feel, that when we look at consumer law, we have to take into account the vast progress that's been made in some sectors. And it would be helpful if the Minister was able to look forward into that going forward. My honourable friend wants to... Yep.
So, I've spotted a problem. There needs to be a distinction between online games, i.e. games that require constant online service like MMOs, and anything that's heavily online, versus single player. Now, of course, that line is blurred because even single players have multiplayer options or have online elements, but they are single player. They don't need to be online. Online is just how you access them these days. So immediately there is this distinction issue.
Thank you. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way, and he's making a great speech. On the issue about amendment to the law, I think what it requires is a simple amendment to the Consumers Rights Act to ensure that when a game requires online support, developers must allow the purchase to continue with that support.
Again, these are really practical implementations that could go forward, and I thank my honourable friend for that. As I say, if a game is likely to go offline, gamers should be told. Where possible, offline modes should be provided. When closures are unavoidable, there should be clear notice periods, and where appropriate, refunds. And where a game has no commercial future, studios should be encouraged or supported to preserve assets for cultural history. Some companies already show leadership. Ubisoft offered refunds when the Crew was shut down. Valve
yeah, after how much backlash?
released the Team Fortress 2 source code to help ensure long-term preservation. Responsible practice is possible. What we need now is a collaborative code of practice developed jointly by industry, consumer groups, preservation experts and government. Not heavy-handed law, but clear expectations. We must also recognise the independent developers cannot realistically achieve archive every unsuccessful project. Yes.
I thank the honourable member for South Norfolk for giving way. I think you're making an excellent case. I represent the city of Dundee, otherwise known as the gaming capital of Europe. Does it come as no surprise, given where the city created Lemmings and Grand Theft Auto and has the world's first university degree in computing gaming, that you ended up with the highest signatures of support for this petition? And actually, by not amending the law to make sure we protect the future for consumers and also for those who create the games, that you actually put in our courses, for example, or degrees, and those who work domestically, both in Scotland and the rest of the UK, at risk, their jobs at risk?
I would argue their jobs are already at risk. Even when they are successful, these studios will just fire the developers. And that's why it needs unions and better legal protections. This allowing consumers to actually keep what they've purchased is not going to put anyone at risk. Publishers are putting jobs at risk.
I thank the honourable member for his intervention, and this is the one time I'll say I'm quite jealous of your constituency, because you are, I was going to say, have the constituency that has laid the golden egg in terms of the cultural relevance of GTA is never ending, and when the next title is released, it will be bigger than any movie that's been released within the United Kingdom, if not the world, for many, many years. As I say, so I asked the Minister to work with studios and consumer groups to establish clear expectations around shutdowns and access, to support cultural institutions like the National Video Game Museum, and to help develop an industry-led framework to preserve our gaming heritage for the future generations. This is about fairness, responsibility, creativity, and protecting a cultural legacy of which... Very quickly...
You know that you're not able to intervene having not been here at the start of Mr Goldsborough's contribution, and that is one of the House rules. Mr Goldsborough.
Well, on that note, Mr Mundell, I was about to finish. This is about fairness, responsibility, creativity and protecting a cultural legacy of which the United Kingdom should be proud.
Thank you. And I'm sure all members will, if they are going to make very specific references to games and their various levels, will share that information directly with Hansard. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 702074 relating to consumer law and video games. Tom Gordon.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's an honour to serve under your chairship. There's been a number of instances in this place where I've had to come out, first as LGBT, then as Parliament's biggest Swiftie, and now today as a gamer. I have been playing computer games since I was a little kid. I can remember waking up every morning before going to school to plug the internet in to download the latest bits for The Sims. It's been a staple of my life. I think the points that have been raised by the honourable member introducing the debate, he's highlighted all the different reasons, a myriad of why people do game, whether it be to switch off, to unwind, to make friends. It's a never-ending world of wonder for people who get into gaming, and I count myself as one of them. The issue does happen. What happens when a developer goes bust or shuts down or gets gobbled up into a merger? In those instances, there's no clear responsibility of who the burden falls to host or run servers for online gaming. Now, most of the games that I played are not online, but I understand from those that do, that already we see issues where servers have gone offline or have been timing out and running out. I think we've only got to look at what's happening in the recent landscape with the gaming industry. We're seeing EA being bought up by a conglomerate, including with Saudi Arabia and others, as part of a £55 billion deal. The acquisition will make it off the stock market and will be owned by private equity. And we've already seen measures that they're taking to replace their developers with AI. And that puts a question mark there about how long-term and sustainable that gaming on platforms like that will be provided to consumers. What I'd like to see, and I'm sure the Minister will be invited by many members across the House, is clearer, more tangible responsibilities from government and protections for consumers. I will give way.
Thank you for giving way. It's simply a matter of natural justice that if someone has paid for a product which is either physical or digital, they should be expected to use it for as long as they like, and the fact that the companies go bust should not make any difference to that.
Exactly. You can just download, assuming it's not an MMO, an online game, you should be able to just download it. GOG does this. Like, this is a thing that can be done. And it feels like a lot of these people aren't understanding that.
I thank the honourable member for that point, and I completely agree with her. I think there is a change in the way in which people have been gaming, and it's sort of been a silent, creeping approach over the years. I can remember, like I say, when I started playing games, most of them were on CD discs, which now is a thing of the past. You don't see those anymore, do you? There's also a particular divergence between PC gaming, which is much easier to host servers remotely or privately. When it comes to consoles, that's a little bit harder. So I don't necessarily expect the government to get into the weeds on that, but maybe setting out some clear principles that gamers can expect would be a welcome first step. For me, I'd like to thank the constituents who got in touch with me raising this debate, an important one, and everyone who signed the petition, and we'll look forward to hearing what the Minister has to say on this matter.
Henry Tufnell.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I thank the honourable members for their excellent speeches. For millions across the UK, video games are more than just entertainment. They're a creative outlet, a way to unwind, and a means of connecting with other gamers across the world. As a cornerstone of our creative industries, the UK is one of the largest video game markets in the world, with sales reaching nearly £4.3 billion from 2024. From Harry Potter and James Bond to the British Premiership football, some of the most popular games worldwide are rooted in British culture. I'm delighted that this Labour government is backing this sector's continued growth, investing £40 million in start-up video game studios and expanding creative tax industry reliefs to incentivise further innovation and investment. The Welsh Labour government is also championing our creative industries through its dedicated economic development agency, Creative Wales. This agency supports creatives across the country, including the brilliant independent game developer Goldborough Studio, based in Loreni, in my constituency of Mid and South Pembrokeshire. However, some of my constituents are concerned that consumer rights in this space have not kept up with advancing technology, leaving gamers in danger of losing out. As the honourable members have set out already in this debate, publishers of online video games can, at their discretion, shut down the servers that keep these games running. When this happens, the games become unplayable, leaving consumers who have paid for them without access to these digital worlds. They've invested their time, imagination, and money in them. Under the Consumer Rights Act 2015, digital content must be described by the seller. If the game is sold without clear information about its support, lifespan, or potential server shutdowns, consumers are entitled to repair, replacement, or refund. A recent example is Concord, a game released for PlayStation 5 and Windows in August 2024. Following a disappointing launch, Sony Interactive Entertainment made a commercial decision to shut it down. To their credit, they did refund all purchases, but this is not always...
After how much backlash again?
...the case. I know the honourable members will agree that where publishers fail to make the lifespan of a game clear at the point of sale, they must be held accountable. That's why I welcome the strengthened consumer protections, including the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act 2024, which came into force earlier this year. This legislation rightly requires traders to provide clear, timely and accurate information to consumers, including about the longevity and functionality of digital products. More broadly, though, my constituent Stuart Coombs raised an important cultural point. Video games are unique creative works, blending music, design, storytelling and interactivity in ways that no other medium can. They allow players to inhabit imagined worlds and engage with complex narratives. When publishers disabled these games... Of course, I will give way to my friend.
Thank the honourable member for giving way, and I thank the honourable member for securing this important debate. A self-confessed survival horror game fan, by the way, since we're all doing that declaration. Would my honourable friend agree with me that the evolution of video games over a number of years, by including an online component, has created a cultural product that is unfamiliar to us in other territory, and it therefore presents a lot of problems, potential problems, in terms of the longevity of that online component, as opposed to the standalone playability of a game. So, for example, would one expect to be able to revisit a concert 10 years after the concert had taken place, rather than simply playing the album of that music again?
Right, I feel like this is a spurious comparison. The performer, the artists, have to go to other places. And an album, I mean, we don't have albums anymore, do we? I.e. the CD, the game itself. That has been taken away from us. We have to go online to download it. But we're not allowed to, keep it. So therein is the issue. We want to be able to keep it. You can't travel through time and go to the, concert again. You can't get the game again for the first time. This is a very spurious comparison.
I thank the honourable, my honourable friend for his intervention. I agree with him in the extent to which these have a cultural identity to them, and in doing so, you're raising a cultural and artistic heritage, which is vitally important to society and to the wider industry as well. And as campaigners have rightly argued, if every copy of a book, film or song were destroyed, we would see it as a cultural tragedy. We should view the loss of video games in the same light. And so I thank my honourable friend for his timely intervention. So I ask the Minister, does she agree that video games are a vital part of our creative and cultural landscape? And will she commit to exploring how we can better protect consumers and preserve access to these digital works even after commercial support ends? Thank you.
Pam Cox.
Thank you, Mrs Mondell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today, and thank you to the member for South Norfolk for securing this important debate. As we've heard, this shines a light on a growing disconnect between video game consumers and the companies that profit from them. This e-petition has received nearly 190,000 signatures nationwide, and my constituency, Colchester, ranks within the top 20 of those. And I thank those who signed it for standing up for fairness and their digital rights. Now, I should say I'm not a gamer. I feel rather in the minority here. But as a parent of gamers, I have made a very solid financial contribution to the gaming industry over the years. Colchester has a
10 points to Gryffindor, indeed.
thriving video game industry of its own, based around the Innovation Centre and Knowledge Gateway at the University of Essex. And the university itself offers a very respected BSc in game technology. The city also has a fantastic creative digital learning charity called Signals, which offers superb short courses to school pupils, very good for half-term recreation, as I recall, in animation, coding and other skills that underpin that industry. And I can't resist just saying that Colchester has another claim to fame in this space. It was recreated in Assassin's Creed Valhalla, where players are able to roam around our Roman and Anglo-Saxon heritage. I don't know if any other constituency can match that. I raise you. So this is yet another testament to our city's huge cultural importance. And it also reminds us that, as so many have said here, games are more than entertainment. They combine rich and complex design, art, graphics, and music. But what happens when that rich content is deleted? When publishers shut down servers or revoke access, consumers lose something they've paid for, often with very little warning or recourse. And that's not just inconvenient, it's fundamentally unfair. Other forms
It's theft.
of cultural production live on, films, books, music, and so on. But we have allowed a situation to develop with the gaming industry where games are sold to consumers to play, but it's never quite clear when it's game over. The Stop Killing Games movement highlights growing frustration among players who see their purchases vanish. So it's very clear that digital ownership must be respected, and publishers should look to provide routes to players to retain or repair games, even if their official service support for these products ends. So I welcome the government's willingness to monitor this issue, not least because current laws, as we've heard, like the Consumer Rights Act, clearly do not offer adequate consumer protections from digital obsolescence. So I would ask the Minister to review statutory protections in digital ownership and protect gamers in Colchester and elsewhere. Thank you.
Mark Sewers.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's a privilege to serve under your chairmanship. And congratulations to the member for South Norfolk for opening this debate so aptly. When I was elected last July, I did not imagine that one of my contributions in Westminster Hall would be on the subject of video games. It wasn't on my bingo card, or again, maybe more aptly, it wasn't in my inventory. But here we are, and I am glad we are here because while video games might not often feature in parliamentary debate, the issues raised today affect far more than the gaming industry, juggernaut though it is. They go to the very heart of consumer law, ownership rights, and the path we are on in a digital age. Now, it's worth noting that I'm speaking today as the Vice Chair of the APPG on consumer protection, so some of my arguments are primarily going to focus on that dimension. It's also worth saying that video games in their own right have definitely been part of the public discourse many times since their widespread adoption as a medium for entertainment. Like everyone, I've heard the common questions about their merits, their impact on young people, whether they cause brain rot, whether they inspire violence, and so on. Although I'd argue they don't do those things, certainly not the last two, this is not what the debate's about. It's not whether they're good or bad. It's about something much more fundamental. So when you buy something, should you have the right to keep it? And let me be clear about the ask here. I'm not demanding that publishers keep servers running forever. Campaigners are not asking for indefinite technical support. We are not asking these companies to keep pouring resources into a game that they themselves are finished with. What we are asking is fairly simple, that publishers should not be able to deliberately disable every copy of a game that consumers have already purchased, leaving them with nothing. Now, I want to talk first about the end of support and what that means in this context. Normally, end of support means that if something goes wrong, the customer's on their own. And that's fair enough, perfectly reasonable, depending on the context. An iPhone that you bought 14 years ago no longer receives updates from Apple, but can still be unlocked and take calls. An old toaster can still toast your bread, even though it doesn't have smart sensors and a touchscreen. And a decades-old printer...
Yeah, exactly.
No longer receives updates from the company that made it, but it still prints documents. But what we're seeing here is different. It's as if you bought that printer, and one day the manufacturer sent out a signal that deliberately stopped it from working at all, claiming
Planned obsolescence, exactly.
it had reached the end of support. So that's not support ending, that's obsolescence, which has a very different meaning entirely. Of course.
Thank you. First of all, thank the member of Norfolk South mentioned Grand Theft Auto. The main developer for the new version of Grand Theft Auto 6 is Rockstar Leeds. So I'm sure the honourable friend and myself both have many constituents who work there. But on the issue of obsolescence, many people create private servers and play the games on these private servers. I myself am a big fan of Assassin's Creed, where many of the versions have been made obsolete by Ubisoft. But the people involved can keep those private servers going if there's an end of service patch that allows that to carry on. And so you effectively don't have that built-in obsolescence. And it's a very simple thing to do and should be part of consumer protection.
Yes, exactly. And the thing is, for single-player games, you don't need private servers. You can just download a legal copy from the library that's available to play. You don't need private servers. These are not online games.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. When the boundary review took place a few years ago, I was very disappointed to see that Rockstar Leeds was not drawn into my constituency. So I'm very jealous about that. However, I will say that I do still have constituents that work there. And I do agree entirely with his point. It's almost like he's read a few pages on in my speech. You absolutely can have private servers that take care of it. It doesn't require the developer to keep things running or to put their own resources endlessly into a game to keep it alive. Consumers can do that themselves. And of course, as I was saying, the publisher should have a duty to ensure that the game, purchased and owned by the consumer, remains playable in some way. And it's not about burdening publishers, it's not about government overreach, it's about ensuring the publishers do not have the right to deliberately disable products that people have already paid for. If we were talking about mobile phones or any of the other things that I listed earlier, I suspect this debate would resonate even more strongly, but the principle is the same. If we don't act now, the use of this model and the erosion of ownership rights may spread to other areas. Now, history is littered with examples of governments acting too late, only to find out what could have been fixed early with minimal effort has grown into a much larger problem. I think that the warning signs are here in this industry, and to act now would be far less painful than to wait until this practice has become entrenched. And as we know, consumers are noticing. Campaigns have started. The reason we're even here today is that nearly 200,000 people in the UK have signed a petition demanding action on this specific area. The Stop Killing Games campaign, a consumer movement started by YouTuber Ross Scott, has shone the light on this issue, but not just here in the UK, across Europe and beyond. The European Citizens Initiative reached over 1.4 million signatures. I heard that referenced earlier. So it's not a niche concern of a few people, but a growing movement of consumers who feel that their rights are being undermined. Now, my office has corresponded with Ross, and I'm very grateful for the information he gave me ahead of the debate. He really is a champion of these issues. And I've done my own research too, and there are some examples I'd like to go through. The first is The Crew. This was a game released in 2014, costing consumers between 40 and 60 quid on average. Sold about 12 million copies, but it was shut down in 2024 with no way of being played. Now, Ubisoft, to their credit, did offer refunds to recent purchases, but certainly not to the original ones. And whilst it was largely an online game, it did have a single-player component that was unplayable when the servers went down. That's one example. Another example that Ross gave me was Lawbreakers. So this is a game that I imagine would have been popular with certain members of the previous Parliament, but it survived a year before it was shut down in 2018. Babylon's Fall, no refunds, despite the game being unplayable less than a year after launch. It may not have been the best game, but the principle still stands. It was made, sold, and then pulled with no refunds. And of course, just this summer, it was announced that Anthem will no longer be playable from January next year, only a few months' time. As of December 23, it had sold 5 million copies, and it had made over $100 million in digital revenue. An additional 3.5 million had been spent on in-game purchases, and all of that money is now gone. Meanwhile, other games like Guild Wars have been running for over 20 years and are still going strong. The point is clear, even though the industry is not. There is no standard, there's no transparency, and there's no certainty for consumers. So, in response to this petition, the government has said it has no plans to amend consumer law. And while I respect the government's position, I can't help but observe that what's happening in this space could be perceived as a breach of consumer protection from unfair trading regulations. Now, those regulations prohibit traders from hiding information that consumers need to make an informed choice. And yet, when you buy a game today, you are almost never told how long it will remain functional. You are sold a one-time purchase, but the publisher reserves the right to terminate it at any time for any reason, of course.
Member for giving way. So in fact, one of my constituents has written to me about feeling misled when the industry uses the word buy for video games that can later disappear from their digital library. So does the honourable member agree that we need transparency so consumers know exactly what they're paying for at the point of purchase, and clarity that buy should mean buy and not borrow until revoked? Thank you.
I thank the member for her intervention, and I couldn't agree more. It goes back to that point I was making earlier. The fix in this area could be as simple as that. That transparency, that if you are purchasing a game, it is crystal clear that they could deactivate it at any point. However, I do want to go further and say that we need to retain something that ensures publishers make the game playable for consumers long after they have pulled support from it. Now, just briefly going back to The Crew, the game did not need to be shut down. Ubisoft could have patched in offline play or allowed private servers, as my honourable friend for Leeds Central and Headingley made reference to earlier. So going forward, I think the ask from many consumers to the industry is pretty simple. If they plan to kill the game, please ensure consumers have a reasonable option to continue using their products for the single-player experience or on private servers. Some gamers, including one of my Leeds South Western Morley constituents, who I promised I'd raise this in today's debate, they've waited years for some certain games, including the remake of Knights of the Old Republic, which I'm told is one of the greatest games of all time. Imagine, then, if Saber Interactive released the final version of this game, which I know they plan to do at some point in the future, only to then pull it a year later, how devastated those gamers would be. And that's what we're trying to stop here today. And let's not forget, we're not talking about a small, powerless industry. We're talking about publishers that generated a combined total of $455 billion in revenue last year alone, if you account for all types of gaming.
Exactly. These publishers, they'll cry poverty, and yet they'll constantly increase the prices. I mean, look at The Outer Worlds 2. What a mid-game that is.
So by most industry measures, the global video game sector is now larger than the film and music industries combined. Analysts at Forbes say gaming is now the dominant entertainment industry. So the costs of ensuring long-term playability are negligible when compared to the budgets of these major publishers. We're talking about tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes nothing at all, set against budgets in the tens or the hundreds of millions, combined with the revenue that's in the billions. So I just want to be clear once again, this is not just about video games. Our greatest fan across the Atlantic, Elon Musk, has already shown us with Tesla that features in cars can be remotely disabled, even when the original buyer has already paid for them. So this technology already exists to remotely modify products in a way that the consumer may not have been reliably informed about at purchase. So what's stopping the progression of these modifications to rendering purchases totally and utterly unusable? Do we really want to wait until our phones, our fridges, our cars are affected by this before we act in this small way on what is a relatively small area? So my ask today is very simple. I urge the government to revisit this issue and to meaningfully engage with the asks of this petition. It's not too late to change the law or issue guidance in some way on what should happen in these circumstances with games that go offline. But if we do fail to act, the consequences for consumers, especially in the age of digital ownership, could be significant later on. This is about putting people first, a proud tradition of the Labour Party that I am a proud member of, ensuring that consumer rights are protected, not just today, but for the future. It's very clear to me that when you buy something, it should be yours to keep, not just until the seller decides otherwise. Thank you.
Vicky Slade, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. It's a pleasure to serve under your chair, and I want to thank the 236 constituents from Mid Dorset and North Poole for taking the trouble to sign this petition, and in particular to Hayden Shaw for spending quite a lot of time with me last month to explain the impact that this situation is having on him and other gamers. I have to admit that it is not my specialist subject. Video games today are a vital part of modern British culture, and whilst many parents like me think that our sons and daughters are locked away in their bedrooms playing alone, it turns out that my son Isaac was having great fun with people all around the world. Every time I heard a noise, it was him jumping off the sofa as he experienced the immersive video games he was playing, maintaining friendships after he went off to university, proving that video games can bring people together even when they are a long way apart. The artists, coders and other designers who create such lifelike images and develop such intricate stories for us to enjoy through our phones, computers and games consoles bring joy to millions and allow many of us to experience these places, times through history, and I would recommend Colchester in the age of empires, and when it was an original Roman capital of Britain, and alternative realities. My local college is now offering esports as a technical course, and Bournemouth University offers a degree in games design, which provides routes into other specialist fields that can unlock cutting-edge technology for the military. VR is providing new ways for medics to learn, and in Bournemouth, through gaming, children have been taught road safety skills through headsets, thanks to the creativity and imagination of those in this sector. So when a game shuts down, it can feel like losing a favourite book or film forever. And when a business is gobbled up like a scene out of Pac-Man, which probably gives away a little of my early gaming, the purchaser's rights should be maintained. Purchasers must expect transparency and fairness when making the purchase. Clear, accessible information about whether a game requires online connectivity, relies on servers or is time limited. And as Alex told me, it's important that buyers know what the end of life looks like, even if there is going to be an end of life. The law already requires such material information should not be hidden or omitted, but in reality, according to players like Hayden, it's very difficult to find this information, and many are led to feel misled or shortchanged.
Yeah, exactly. And whenever you want to get customer support, it's just impossible. If you've ever had to go through Ubisoft, say, it's just an endless cycle and redirecting. It's incredible, and it's just going to be AI slop now these days. There's no human being you can talk to. So again, it's just complete obscurity. And speaking of obscurity, whenever you're buying like a game, and it's especially from one of the bigger studios, how many editions do they have? Especially Ubisoft, and it's just there's a spreadsheet of what you get when, and they don't really let you know if you already have that. It's just, yeah, it's just very opaque.
The UK already has strong consumer protections, and these laws require that those products, including digital products, are described are of satisfactory quality and that sellers must not omit material information. But those protections are not well understood, not well enforced, and need to be kept under constant review as technology evolves so consumers can exercise their rights. Now, we all understand that ongoing support for titles that are no longer popular or have been superseded will eventually need to end. But to stop those that have been purchased from being playable feels like the pages of a book that was once bought but now out of print going blank after a period of time, sort of like writing in invisible ink. Or the sound of a song no longer being sold in record shops going silent. And there is additional concern in relation to the creativity behind a game, the designers and coders for whom those games are their CV. Whilst the intellectual property has moved from designer to owner in terms of control, for content to disappear is leading to concern by creatives that their work is not just being lost, but it never existed in the first place.
Exactly, and a lot of these studios, I mean, there's a reason EA is called the gravedigger of studios. They'll buy IP and then just bury them, never do them again, or they'll bastardize them, turning them into, I mean, a mobile game like the Command & Conquer series. Ugh.
Another issue that my constituents have alerted me to is the actions of console operators disabling their devices when a counterfeit game is used, often innocently. So imagine one's bought a second-hand game from a specialist retailer, a charity shop or an online marketplace, only to find out that it's not genuine. Now, you might expect...
Yeah, I think the second-hand industry is dead, and I consider this just not owning the games anymore, an extension of the industry wanting to kill the second-hand market. There's no second-hand market anymore.
The game to be disabled when you play it, and you'd be within your rights to take that up with the seller. But the console companies are locking down the whole console, so they can't be used for anything else. And unless you get permission from that console company, your whole games console, which might have cost you £500, is completely unplayable. As we move to a digital system for music, games, literature, film and photos, now must be the time to consider risks to other sectors with their intellectual property. The best way forward is not heavy-handed regulation, but constructive dialogue between government, players and developers to strengthen clarity for consumers, encourage responsible preservation and respect intellectual property. The goal needs to be a balance of protecting consumers and creators whilst sustaining an industry that contributes so much. My constituent Philip said, "I have an old gaming PC running Windows 7, now unsupported but still functioning." He asks, what if this was to extend to other types of software? And as is just mentioned, what if future software companies decided to end support for something we use on a wider scale, something in our companies, in our homes, or even with government? So I would ask the Minister to provide clarity, not only from members here and our constituents, but to think about the issues of consumer protection, intellectual property, obsolescence, and the classic David and Goliath battle so beautifully captured in the video game Conquering Giants, that actually the individual must be buying something that they are buying.
I now call Opposition Spokesman Joe Robertson.
It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mr Mundell, and I'm grateful for the contributions of members who've spoken passionately about this issue, in particular the Honourable Member for South Norfolk, who led this debate, and for those who have signed the petition. Video games are a very significant part of the entertainment and creative industries and give pleasure to millions. As we've already heard, they have a cultural relevance today not seen perhaps in previous generations. The lazy stereotype of a sector dominated by teenagers is very far from reality. Research has found that 1 in 6 adults in the UK regularly play video games. If we include under 18s, then there are currently 40 million gamers across the UK today. Franchises such as Call of Duty, FIFA and Assassin's Creed attract millions of players and have production values and graphics which earlier generations of gamers could barely dream of. The UK can be proud of its own video games industry, which is the largest in Europe. Titles such as Grand Theft Auto and Tomb Raider are just two of the most significant examples of the UK games creative industry. Some estimates suggest that the UK games market could reach 8 billion by 2027. That would be more than the UK film industry today. That was why the previous Conservative government took measures to support the video games industry. It created the 13.4 million UK Games Fund, which, between 2022 to 2025 this year, supported the acceleration of growth of the UK games sector. An independent 2025 review of the UK Games Fund said, overall, we estimate that the current 3-year iteration of the UK GF will generate in the range of 30 million to 58 million in productivity benefits for the UK economy due to salary uplifts for supported video game developers. The previous government also set the right economic environment to create the conditions for growth. This included the announcement in the spring 2023 budget that the video games expenditure credit would be introduced from the 1st of January last year. VGCE is calculated directly from qualifying expenditure and has a credit rate of 34%, which provides a greater benefit than the earlier video games tax relief. To turn to the issue raised...
Speaking of tax relief, remember Hyenas from, was it Creative Assembly? Hyenas got £100 million from the UK taxpayer. And what happened to that? What happened to that online gambling game? Oh, that's right, nothing, because it was a disaster. Instead of focusing all their energy on the magnum opus that should be Warhammer 3, they were doing that. And what did the British taxpayer get out of it?
By the petition, the Stop the Games campaign did a tremendous job of raising awareness of video game publishers, disabling, discontinuing, or removing access to parts of, or in some cases, the entirety of their games. Some members in this chamber have had a favourite video game, some of which we've heard of, and I know that they in particular will understand just how frustrating and disappointing it would be not to be able to play that game again. In a perfect world, everyone would have access to their favourite games forever.
It's not about access. You should be able to just download it because that's what you do now. Except this time you can permanently download it.
But this is not a perfect world, and we need to strike a balance between consumer interests and the burdens on some video games producers. We need to tread carefully, and in particular to avoid introducing changes which would increase the cost to successful video games companies of supporting older games which have a declining number of players, money that might otherwise be spent on developing newer, better games. But we've already heard anecdotes.
What innovation is going to be stifled by this? The innovation of, I don't know, Nintendo trying to patent everything? Or remember Warner Bros., the Nemesis system? That's patented and buried forever now because they ruined it with the innovation of loot boxes. The innovation of, what was it, Destiny 2? Hiding player XP, outright lying to players. You know, the innovation of patenting a dialogue wheel. You know, what innovation is going to be stifled by this?
Evidence today that sometimes we hear of games withdrawn that seem to be otherwise generating considerable profits with a considerable number of consumers without obvious reason. I give way.
Thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. In my speech, I talked about the fact that there had been a recent buyout of EA. Part of that investment by the consortium is taking on large amounts of debt. So profitable games like FIFA and other titles now will have to find money to service that debt. Does he share my concerns that sort of equity companies, capital buying up the games actually might hinder the market?
Yeah, exactly. It has BlackRock buying up all the homes. Does that help the housing market? You know, I mean, we don't even need to talk about equity. Just EA itself and other big companies just buying up studios and burying them. Microsoft has, bought up Lionhead Studios. When are we going to see that Fable game? Was it written by... Did they hire British writers to give it that British flair? I doubt it.
The honourable member makes a perfectly valid point, and I do sympathise with it. It's certainly true that there are a number of different games providers, and some are backed by large money and debt. We have to be very clear to distinguish between the variety of games providers that there are out there, and I want to go on to say something about the smaller providers. In particular, the principles which underlie this issue seem to me to be clear. It's incumbent on games companies to make absolutely clear to consumers where there is the possibility that their games may become unplayable after a period of years. That is a responsibility which I hope that the video games industry would be happy to accept via clear...
Hope? You hope? We're not interested in what you hope. We need action.
...consumer messaging. And I certainly would expect the two industry trade associations to ensure that this happens as a matter of course. But as I noted, we must also bear in mind the cost to video game publishers of continuing the software. It could become an unfair burden, especially on games producers that are comparatively small, independent businesses who are already facing increased costs.
It's not going to increase their cost. It's literally just a patch where you can download. GOG does this now. It's not an increased cost. This is such corpo speak.
In that, can the Minister take this opportunity to reassure the industry generally that she is battling for the interests of the creative industries as a consideration in the forthcoming budget that the Chancellor is in the process of writing? The Government also has responsibility for evaluating if the protections in place for consumers are both effective and sufficient. We cannot simply assume that they are. Consumers are predominantly protected by the Consumer Rights Act 2015 and the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008. The CRA ensures that if the software is offered for sale that is not supported by the provider, then this should be made clear, for example, on product web pages and on physical packaging and labelling. Has the Minister evaluated whether she believes the existing labelling or consumer information is sufficient? As I say, we cannot simply assume it to be so because the law and regulations exist. We have had recent experiences within other fields, for example, with Oasis Tickets and Ticketmaster, when, as the Competition and Markets Authority found, consumers were not given sufficient information. If the number of games being disabled or deactivated is increasing, perhaps it's time to consider if the existing information is suitable. Of course, if digital content does not meet CRA's quality rights, the consumer is entitled to a repair or replacement, or if not possible, money back up to 100% of the cost of the digital content. These rights apply to intangible digital content, such as a PC game, as well as tangible content like a physical copy of the game. Has the Minister made an assessment of how successful consumers are at seeking redress from video publishers? The consumer protection rights which the last government put into primary legislation prohibit commercial practices which omit or hide information which the average consumer needs to make an informed choice, and prohibits traders from providing material in an unclear, unintelligible, ambiguous or untimely manner. As with CRA right to redress, does the Minister believe that the existing route via citizens' advice, trading standards and, where appropriate, the CMA is an appropriate avenue for consumers? And can the Minister update us on how many consumers have achieved compensation via these routes? Now, the Government has already confirmed that it has no plans to amend existing consumer law on disabling video games. That may be a proportionate approach on the basis of what we currently know. However, the Digital Markets Competition and Consumers Act 2024 will give ministers the power to add amend or remove a description of a commercial practice which are in all the circumstances considered unfair? Can the Minister clarify if she will be willing to use these powers in the case of video games if the evidence suggests that the industry commercial practices fall short? Will the Minister confirm that the Government will ensure that the disabling of games is monitored to determine if it's increasing? And can she confirm the CMA will look at the existing information requirements when given to consumers to identify if it's adequate? All said, the previous government recognised the importance of the sector, and I hope the Minister ensures that while looking at whether more can be done to address this issue, any new measures do not stifle growth. Consumers must be protected, but we have a great UK video game sector, and we on this side want to see it go from strength to strength.
Minister Stephanie People.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship, Mr Mundell, and I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for South Norfolk, for introducing this important debate, as well as everyone who signed the petition raising this important issue. And I'd of course like to thank all of the contributors to this debate. I think it's been a really interesting and thought-provoking debate to hear the different perspectives and indeed experiences of honourable members. And some of the figures that were shared during the debate, I think, really bring to life the importance of this sector. £7.6 billion contribution to the economy, tens of thousands of jobs, and indeed, as the opposition spokesperson mentioned, the millions of gamers up and down the country who enjoy gaming daily. So of course, as a government, we recognise the huge economic contribution, but also how it is a cultural powerhouse, in the words of the honourable member who led the debate. The member for Cambridge spoke about the wider benefits of gaming, and I'm aware of the Power to Play report, which gives an insight into the social purpose of gaming. And the member for Pembrokeshire spoke about the vital importance of our creative landscape. And I will address the points on ownership and consumer rights throughout my contribution, but in answer to his questions is a simple yes. It is important that we have effective advice and information. And of course, I'm delighted to always be a champion for the creative industries. I'm indeed standing in for the Minister of State. This isn't my policy area, but this is a shared area between the DCMS and DBT. And in the DCMS, we're very pleased to be championing video games across government. And I want to begin there by by saying this government takes its role in supporting video games, both as an industry and as an art form, very seriously. We are all aware of the economic power and potential for growth in this sector, and that was highlighted in the Creative Industries Sector Plan. And that is why we've committed £30 million investment with our Games Growth Package. But of equal importance is gaming's place in culture, which I think is really featured in today's debate. For over 40 years, video games have been entertaining audiences of all ages. And today, the vast majority of young people will grow up with video games, making memories that they'll carry with them throughout their lives. Video games, much like films and music, have become cultural touchstones. And with that in mind, the government recognises the strength of feeling behind the campaign that led to the debate today. The petition that has prompted this debate attracted nearly 190,000 signatures, and similar campaigns, including a European Citizens Initiative, reached over 1 million signatures. It has seen significant interest across the world. Indeed, as has been said, this is a global conversation. And the passion behind the campaign demonstrates that the core underlying principle is a valid one, that gamers should have confidence in the right to access the games that they have paid to play. At the same time, the government also recognises the concerns from the video gaming industry regarding some of the campaign's asks. Online video games are often dynamic, interactive services, not static products, and maintaining online services requires substantial investment over years or even decades. Games are more complex now than ever before to develop and maintain, with the largest exceeding the budget of a modern Hollywood blockbuster. This can make it extremely challenging to implement plans for video games after formal support for them has ended, and risk creating harmful, unintended consequences for gamers as well as for video games companies. A number of members have made points around ownership, and I think it is important to note that games have always been licensed to consumers rather than sold outright.
Always? No, not always. There used to be a second-hand market. This is completely wrong. She is so obviously being fed a script, a corpo script. That's absurd.
1980s, tearing the wrapping on a box to a games cartridge was the way in which gamers agreed to licensing terms. Today, this happens when we clicked accept when buying a game on a digital storefront. Licensing video games is not as some...
Yeah, but that's an artificial restriction. They just put that there. There are plenty of games, like again, from GOG, where you can just own them.
have suggested a new unfair business practice. However, the video game industry has changed a lot over recent decades in ways that
Well, then laws need to change then, don't they?
directly impact the way these licenses are sold under law. First, video game development today is more complex, and it is done at a much greater scale than 40 years ago.
Well, because of whom? Whose fault is that? With the constant push for, look at how amazing our graphics are, look how complex our game is. And yet often those games are, I mean, right, with Unreal Engine 5, they're just barely working.
Secondly, the format of video games has shifted from physical to digital. As a result, the approach to protecting intellectual property has changed, including, and the most relevant to this debate, the always online functionality, which requires games.
Again, that is an artificial functionality. You don't need that unless unless you're playing online specifically, or you're playing an online game like an MMO. If you're single player, you don't need online functions
To maintain a constant connection to an online server. For gamers used to dusting off their Nintendo 64 to play Mario Kart whenever they like, or in my case, Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation.
You know, the offline mode.
Without the need for an internet connection, this can of course be frustrating, but it is a legitimate practice that businesses are entitled to adopt. So it is essential that consumers understand what they are paying for, and existing legislation is clear that consumers are entitled to information which enables them to make confident, informed purchasing decisions. Under existing UK legislation, the Consumer Rights Act of 2015 requires that digital content is required to be of satisfactory quality, fit for a particular purpose and described by the seller. It also requires that the terms and conditions applied by a trader to a product they sell must not be unfair and must be prominent and transparent. And the Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Act of 2024 requires information to consumers to be clear and correct, and prohibits commercial practices which through false or misleading information cause the average consumer to make a different choice. Now, points and questions.
Isn't it in Korea or Japan where an online purchase, even sort of items in an MMO, are considered like real property, essentially? I might be wrong on that. If someone knows more, please let me know.
Questions around this were raised by a number of members, including the member for Dundee, Colchester, Stratford-upon-Avon, Harrogate, and indeed both members from Leeds. They made points around consumer law and ownership. Now, UK law is very clear. It requires information to consumers to be clear and correct. And the government is clear. The law works, but companies may need to communicate better. And I think in response to a point made for the honourable member from Leeds South West, this is particularly important in cases where projects fail or games have to be pulled shortly after launch, that the information provided to consumers is clear and is timely. Now, further to this, I understand the campaign argues that rather than just providing clear information, games should be able to be enjoyed offline after developer support has ended, either through an update or a patch, or handing over service to the gaming community to enable continued online play. In other words, mandating the inclusion of end-of-life plans for always online video games. The government is sympathetic to the
No, as far as I know, there's no mandate for always online, no.
Concerns raised, but we do also recognise the challenges in delivering this from the video game industry perspective. First, this would have negative technical impacts on video game development. It is true that there are some games where it would be relatively simple to patch an offline mode after its initial release, but for games whose systems have been specifically designed for an online experience, this wouldn't be possible without major redevelopment. Requiring an end-of-life plan for all games would fundamentally change how games are developed and distributed. While that may well be the desired outcome for some campaigners, it isn't right to say that the solutions would either be simple or inexpensive, particularly for smaller studios. And if they prove to be too risky or burdensome, this could discourage the innovation that is the beating heart of this art form.
What innovation? What innovation is that? Is that EA's Origin acting like actual spyware? That's what I mentioned. It's not hard. You can literally, it's again, this always online thing. You can just patch to download so they can just play it. For single player games, absolutely.
Secondly, this approach carries commercial and legal risks. If an end-of-life plan involves handing online servers over to consumers, it isn't clear who would be responsible for the regulatory compliance or paying third parties who are providing for services.
Then there'd be no third parties to use then. Like, again, these are just such obvious, easy answers. There'd be no more, well, like third parties like what? Data brokers? Yeah, good. But what do you mean? That doesn't make sense.
It could also result in reputational harm for video games businesses who no longer officially support their games. But
no, first of all, the reputation of Ubisoft and EA, please. But if they understand they've ended the support, that's it. That you download at your own risk or play at your own risk. Set up private servers at your own risk. Everybody knows this because it's a thing that is already done. This is corpo speak.
Where illegal or harmful activity takes place. The campaign is clear in its statement that it would not ask studios to pay to support games indefinitely, but it is hard to see solutions to these issues which don't involve significant time, personnel, and monetary investment. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, from the perspective of gamers, are the impacts of safety and security. Under the Online Safety Act of 2023, video games companies are responsible for controlling exposure to harmful content in their games.
Are you serious? Harmful content and the Data Protection Act, do you trust? How many times has Sony just had data breaches and lost your info? How many times, how often are these companies just selling your info? Third parties. Harmful content, like what? The most harmful digital experience is Facebook.
Removing official moderation from servers or enabling community-hosted servers increases the risk that users, including children, could be exposed to this content. Security
Roblox, anyone?
threats could also be more likely with player data no longer be protected on official.
This is just won't someone think of the children nonsense. Children, I mean, some children have PCs, but they're mostly console players. Again, this is just silly.
Servers. So whilst the government is of course supportive of those businesses who are able to implement...
And speaking of protecting children, these companies are literally selling gambling to children. It's literally gambling mechanics.
End-of-life plans voluntarily, we do not think that a blanket requirement is proportionate or in the interests of either businesses or consumers. We believe that our role is to ensure that those selling games and those purchasing it are clear about their obligations and protections under UK consumer law. I want to briefly touch on the subject of video game preservation, which is an important issue for the gaming community and one that the member for South Norfolk rightly spoke about. The government recognises the cultural value of games and actively supports initiatives that promote and support it, whether that's cultural institutions such as the National Video Game Museum and the London Science Museum, digital distribution platforms, or individual video games companies donating their games and hardware to preservation organisations. We recognise that preserving games can be uniquely complex, particularly where they rely on specific hardware or software to function as intended. We welcome ongoing discussions between the industry, national museums, libraries and archives on developing standards for game preservation, and we encourage video game developers and publishers to continue considering preservation efforts when developing, releasing and supporting their games. In the government's response to the petition, we pledge to monitor this issue and consider the relevant work of the Competition and Markets Authority on consumer rights and consumer detriment. Whilst we do not think that mandating end-of-life plans for video games is proportionate or enforceable, we recognise the concerns of gamers about whether information on what they are purchasing is always sufficiently clear. With that in mind, the DCMS, as the lead department for video game policy, and DBT, as the lead department for consumer protection, have engaged the Chartered Trading Standards Institute. The Chartered Trading Standards Institute maintains the Business Companion, a guide for businesses on complying with consumer law in relation to digital content. Following this debate, our two departments will consider the case for asking them to develop guidance which could help businesses ensure that the information provided to video game consumers accurately reflects existing consumer protections. It is vital that we take into account the rights of consumers while continuing to support the growth of our world-leading video games industry and its benefits for the wider economy. So I'd like to once again thank all members who spoke this afternoon, to everyone who signed and engaged with the petition to enable today's debate to take place. Thank you.
And I now call Ben Goldsborough to wind up the debate.
Thank you very much, Mr Mundell. And I want to thank all members that took part today, also all the petitioners as well. I think what we've seen today, if the Honourable Member for Strangford was here, I could say every part of the United Kingdom was represented, but we nearly got there. And what it shows is the benefit of the video games industry to our economy, but also to our culture. And I was really heartened by the closing remarks of the Minister in saying the action that's going to be taken forward to put consumers back at the heart of these processes. This is a very evolving situation right now. We are seeing the video games industry is changing on a daily basis, and ensuring that consumers are at the heart of how the video games industry works going forward is a really heartening step to hear. And as I say, this is something that's not going to go away, and I really hope that the Minister and her department will be working closely with all members who have spoken today to secure the best outcome that we all want.
Yeah.
I do hope there's a game out there where the Honourable Member for Strangford is a character. The question is that this House has considered e-petition 702074 relating to consumer law and video games. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
Well, I'm not very confident that the current administration will do anything. However, it was nice to see so many speakers there who were sympathetic to the cause. So if you have any thoughts, opinions, please let me know. Stop Killing Games is quite important to consumer rights. Thank you very much.